Welcome to the FCS Edge, where we're well into week 2 after an exciting week 1 of FCS action. I'm Craig Haley of Stats Perform and theanalyst.com, joined by co-host Zach McKinnell of FCS Football Central on SI. Our producer is Graham Bell. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that Zach is working up his sinister predictions from his evil lair that also doubles as his home studio. How you doing, Zach?
Good, Craig. Good. I'm excited to talk about week 1. I think a lot of great games. We got some FBS upsets, and we got a lot to talk about.
Well, that's what we're going to do in this episode. We're going to rewind a little bit of week 1. We're going to look into week 2. We're also going to have a special guest in our second segment, Joe D'Antonio, the commissioner of CAA Football, the Coastal Athletic Association. But let's get to it right away. The knee-jerk reactions from week 1. What do you think, Zach?
Man, God, there's so many to go through. I mean, I don't know if there's been a more impressive team this year, Craig, and I know we've only been through I would say 1.5 weeks. Because week 0 really didn't even count as a full week, but Tarleton State's been just amazing to watch. The depth that they have, Craig, where they're playing 25, 30 guys on defense for 10 or more snaps. And they did it against Army, which I know had a lot of turnover, but this was a team that won the American last year, was in the playoff race going into November at one point. And at the same time, it's a program that, even though it has a lot of turnover, Craig, they have that JV team. They develop talent really well. Tarleton State dominated the line of scrimmage, which is so weird when you talk about some of these service academy schools, and you just got to be impressed with their running back room. They lose their starting running back in week 0, and Trey Page and Caleb Lewis have just been outstanding. And Victor Cabales, who was preseason All-American talk, one of the top quarterbacks in the country, hasn't really had to do much because they've been running the ball so well. And then on the flip side, we talk about the turnover for South Dakota State defensively. I don't think he could have went any better than what we saw on Saturday, where they just completely shut down the go-go offense, which got all this offseason hype. South Dakota State thoroughly dominated that game, and they've really made that offense look out of rhythm, out of sync. And Chase Van Tol really does have superstar potential. He was one of our breakout players on an article we released this offseason. When you hurdle a blocker and still find a way to make the sack, man, I don't know what else you can ask from a linebacker. I was thoroughly impressed with both Tarleton and South Dakota State.
Chase was the Saquon Barkley of defense on that play.
Yeah.
Just jaw dropping. I like your reactions. I mean, I'm very similar. I think Tarleton, I actually wrote, has been the story of the early season so far. They were our Stats Perform FCS National Team of the Week, the first team to be 2-0. And, South Dakota State, I mean, just unbelievable what they did to Sacramento State. I mean, I think Sac State has to figure it out a little bit going forward with this kind of start. They were just dominated. I think the SoCon stood out, but not necessarily in a good way. Mercer losing to Presbyterian a year after beating them by 53 points. Gardner-Webb had the biggest comeback win ever by beating Western Carolina. Sanford losing a second straight year to West Georgia. So I think that stands out as something in week 1 that a big storyline. Now, that leads into our top 25 poll. South Dakota State and Montana State, they're playing this week in the biggest non-conference game of the season. They flip-flop. South Dakota State is number 2. Montana State's now number 3. Tarleton has moved up from 10 to 5. There's 3 newcomers. North Dakota at 20, Nichols 22. Southern Utah moved in at 24. But Zach, I know you have a little bit of beef with this week's Stats Perform FCS Top 25, the results of the poll. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? And I do want to say this: nobody's ballot is perfect, and no top 25 is perfect. I mean, from any top 25, you could put together whatever panel you want, and it's not going to be perfect. But I found it a little bit interesting and kind of insane that Mercer was still ranked. And even when you talk about maybe projecting, Craig, I mean, the loss to Presbyterian is really bad, and they looked atrocious in that game. And I know that they were coming back in the game in week 0, which, Craig, I guess you could say didn't happen. But at the same time, they were down in that game too, and they got down early in that game and had to come back. I also think too it's a little bit interesting, and I understand that maybe you're projecting or whatever it may be, but the fact that Nichols is so far behind Incarnate Word, I think they were 10 spots behind when they won that game fairly convincingly, is a little bit interesting. And I also think Austin P, man, when anytime you beat an FBS school by 20 points, it's really hard not to at least put them. I'm cool if you don't want to buy fully in and put them in the top 15, but 25-20. Did they just beat Middle Tennessee State by 20 points, Craig? And they didn't allow 150 yards of total offense. They suffocated Middle Tennessee State and looked like the better team in every phase. Those are some of the things that surprised me. And I do think me and you kind of talked about this off the show, is that I understand some voters want to project. And if Incarnate Word played Nichols today, who would you pick and what would the point spread be? Things like that. But at some point, the on-field results have to count for something, right? And because my thing is kind of like a circular reasoning argument and like philosophy, where if you think Incarnate Word's the better team, Craig, you can see them play 10 times, even if Nichols wins 8. If you're projecting, if you think Incarnate Word's the best team, you're still going to put them ahead. And eventually, for me, I think we have to value on the field results over projection right now, because if Incarnate Word is better than Nichols, Craig, by the time we get to the week 8, week 9, week 10 poll, Nichols will have lost, Incarnate Word will have won, and it would correct itself in the long term. But right now, sitting at week 2, it's really hard to argue Incarnate Word is the better team over Nichols.
Had Nichols 9 on my ballot and UIW 10. So I actually had Nichols ahead. I think the projection component is interesting because I look at it as if you feel a team is 10th on your ballot and another team is 15th because of what they've shown on their resume so far, but you actually feel if they played, you think the number 15 team would beat the number 10. Well, then are you being true to your true ranking by not putting how you actually feel would win a head-to-head matchup? Now, in this case, Nichols did win the head-to-head matchup, but I think the projection is a component that people kind of overlook. Austin P was 1 point out of the top 25. There were 26, but 1 point in the points system. I think when you project there, you can look a little bit at it and say, well, you know what? The United Athletic Conference coaches picked them 6th in the preseason. They had an ultra impressive win. But if you're projecting, you feel like they're not going to stay there. I think that does factor in a little bit. I mean, you do have to look at actual results for sure. But I do think projection is a little bit when you're looking at poll, because you're not just looking at what's happened, you're looking at what's ahead. But Austin P, yes, they had as thorough an FBS win as you're going to get. It's interesting. I mean, no matter what, it's always going to come down to opinion. But I mean, it really creates great talk. And I know going back and forth, we're not going to all feel the same. So I do think it's fun. People get worked up about it, but at the same time, there's reasons behind people's ballots.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like I even put, because I obviously post my ballot on our website, and like I put in the analysis part, man. At the end of the day, it's week 2, and man, for me personally, my ballot's going to change a lot from week 2 to week 3 to week 4, because right now we got 2 data points for like Tarleton State. We have 1 data point for all the other teams, and until we get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 data points, it's a little bit hard. Like, the goal is to have your rankings kind of nailed down by week 8 or week 9. When we have all this data, they should be way more accurate than your week 2, just because you have so much variability. Like you said, some people look at Austin Peay's win and say, well, in the UAC, they got to go through Tarleton. They got to go through Southern Utah. They got to go, through Abilene Christian. Can they get through that gauntlet even though they just beat Middle Tennessee State? And that's a valid projection in my opinion. And you look at some of like the teams in the Big Sky. Can Northern Arizona, can UC Davis, can they get through the Montanas, the Montana States? And it's also hard too, Greg, because we have teams in the top 25 that still haven't played. What do you do with Villanova? What do you do with Montana? Because they haven't played yet. And then it's also hard early in the season for voters because we value FBS wins, but we're kind of trained to overlook FBS losses. And how do you compare South Dakota State's dominant win over Sac State to Montana State going to Oregon and not looking very competitive? But in our head, we still have to know that Craig, that's the number 7 team in the country at the FBS level, and it's a hard place to go and play. How do you balance all that? And I think that's going to be the interesting thing because, like for me, I jumped Tarleton State over South Dakota, and I know South Dakota played a P4 team in Iowa State, and they had they had some, if I'm not mistaken, some injuries, and they got some youth in the secondary, and they got it kind of exposed in that game. But for me, looking at the film, I was a little bit more impressed with Tarleton, so I moved them up one spot over South Dakota. But as South Dakota starts running through the MVFC, I need to adjust my rankings and adjust my perception. Say, man, maybe South Dakota's a little bit better, and it was just a really, really bad matchup with Iowa State. So voters have to weigh a lot. But it's still, for me, I think the biggest thing, what my complaint was with the poll is, I just don't know how you could look at everything and say Mercer deserved a single top 25 vote after what happened this weekend.
Yeah, that's not a good loss to lose to Presbyterian. I do feel, with the projections you mentioned, a team like South Dakota, you have to, as a voter, project that they're going to be fine going forward. I mean, they lost maybe 55 to 7 in their FBS game. I mean, Montana State not looking good. We know they're going to come back at some point. So I think that there is a projection there. I will tell you, teams 15 to 35, we're not even just talking to 25, 15 to 35, they always look alike. The last 10 years, it's just crazy how teams look alike, not just resume-wise, but just their head-to-head results. So UIW, they were a team that really took they needed to take their best step between week 0 and week 1. And that's the adage where a team will never get better as they do from their first game to their second game. They had to solve the run game, and they did somewhat. They had to not have sacks. Richard Torres had to settle himself and not throw interceptions. That all happened when they beat Eastern Washington after the Nichols lost. Is there another team here, maybe a ranked team, that you feel has to take their biggest step here this particular week after a week 1 performance?
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess they fell out of the rankings now, but like I look at like a team like Western Carolina, they gotta figure. I mean, you cannot blow a 35-7 lead. I know Teron Dickens didn't play, but Craig, if you're up 35 to 7, you have to win that. Like, there's no excuse. But I'm gonna pick a ranked team. I'm gonna be honest, man. Monmouth really has to. I know they won, but they got to take a big step forward because if you're gonna win the CAA, your defense has to play better. And if Osborne doesn't go down for Colgate, I'm 100% convinced they lose that game because they had no answer for Colgate's offense. And it also doesn't help that Derek Robertson throws 4 interceptions in the first half. And then in the second half comes out, Craig, and throws, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5 touchdowns and goes insane with almost 500 passing yards. Gavin Nelson was amazing. And I think Monmouth's offense is great, right? 9.3 yards per play. But if you struggle to stop Colgate offensively, I don't love your chances when you go up against the Rhode Islands, the Villanovas. I mean, even the teams like Towson, who are kind of maybe on that fringe competition level for the CAA. Towson's going to eat against that defense if that doesn't improve. And we talked about all the talent they brought in defensively, all the returning talent. Nothing looked like it changed defensively for Monmouth in week 1. If their defense doesn't get better, man, they're not going to be able to outscore everybody and make a run to the playoffs. They're going to have to take a massive step forward defensively if they're really going to want to be the contender that everyone thinks they are.
I'll give you one that I think really has to take a big step. Sacramento State. I mean, South Dakota State's dominance was as impressive as any team out there. And I think Sac State, the jury's still out on them. I mean, they were 3-9 last year. We all kind of drank the Kool-Aid in the offseason with all the transfers, but they just did not gel in this game. 4 transfer running backs. I think it was 16 carries, 37 yards. They were like 2 for 17 on 3rd and 4th downs. I mean, South Dakota State had the ball for 41 minutes. Jaden Rashada, didn't get quite settled. I think he was, about 40% on his passing. I just think their offensive efficiency was so poor with all the people they brought in that I think they have to take that big step. I mean, they have a big opportunity against Nevada this week. Nevada, has lost to some FBS teams in recent years. So I think there's some teams here that have to do a UIW and really solve a lot between their first game and their second game. And we're going to talk a lot about these teams in our Pick'em segment 3. Segment 2, we have Joe D'Antonio, the commissioner of CAA Football, will be our guest. Anything special you hope to learn from the commissioner when we talk to him?
I think everybody, including myself, is interested to talk a little bit about conference expansion. I know a lot of people got questions. There's always fans are always asking who could be the next team to leave, who could be the next team to join. So maybe we can get a little bit of insight on that.
Be a fun conversation with Commissioner. Now, as we go to break from the FCS Edge, we're going to take a look at this week's winners of the Week 1 Stats Perform FCS National Players and Teams of the Week. And we'll be back with the Commissioner in segment 2. This is the FCS Edge. Welcome back to the FCS Edge. We're getting you ready for a banner Week 2 schedule. Here in our second segment, Zach and I are excited to be joined by Joe D'Antonio, who's in his 10th year as the Coastal Athletic Association Commissioner, CAA Football. Commissioner, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, gentlemen. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it. Great to see both of you.
Sure. Now, Commissioner, your league is, we look at it and every year, you're 14 teams deep this year. You look at the preseason poll, it always stands out to me like, the team that's 8th or 9th, and you go, wow, that team is talented and they're 8th or 9th. It just shows you the depth of the league. How is the league viewing this year's race?
Yeah, really good question, Craig. I think one of the things that we've been very fortunate with is the depth of the league, as you indicated. We have teams top to bottom that are committed to being competitive. And that's, I think, what the strength of the league is. We really don't have, we've had teams that have separated themselves at the top. They've been different teams over the years, right? And I think that that's a credit to our coaches, to our athletic directors, and most importantly to our student athletes and the commitment that they've put in to being successful at a high level.
Commissioner, the one big thing that I've heard is even the Southland, the Big Sky have expanded to 9 games, and the Southland Commissioner has even mentioned potentially trying to squeeze in a de facto conference champion with the new schedule coming up. With how many teams you guys have and not everyone playing everybody, is that something that you guys have talked about or explored in utilizing this extra week moving forward?
Yeah, really good question, Zach. It's going to be interesting to see how conferences deal with the quote unquote extra week situation. We've had some preliminary discussions. We're at the present time not looking to go above an 8-game conference schedule. One of the challenges that we have is, we're trying to navigate the geography, right? And we're committed, I should say, to being financially prudent in what we're doing. And we're trying to keep in-conference flights to a minimum. One of the things that could potentially happen to us if we were to add another conference game is it potentially, some of our programs could add another conference flight where it might be better for them to be playing more of a local game as it relates to playing that 12th game. So I think right now we're in a pretty good spot with an 8-game conference schedule. But as things continue to evolve, we're going to continue to make decisions that are best for CAA football. And if ultimately a decision is made to play a 9th game, we're going to make that decision for the right reasons.
Commissioner, your membership has changed as a league. I mean, obviously James Madison went up to the FBS, and Delaware's done the same. This year, Richmond went to the Patriot League. William and Mary and Villanova are going to follow next year. How does your league overcome the loss of such strong programs?
Yeah, Craig, I don't know if I'd really call it overcoming per se. Certainly, the programs that you've mentioned have had a lot of success in our league, and they've been proud members of the league, and we've been happy to have them. Institutions are going to make different decisions as it relates to what they feel is in their best interest. And it's very difficult for me to speak to what the reasons for those decisions are. Those are questions you'd have to ask them. We certainly wish them well. We have two of those programs, William and Mary and Villanova, that are still with us for one more year, and we're certainly gonna obviously embrace them for this year and wish them well as they move into the Patriot League. As it relates to the CAA and the members that we have that are coming back next year, this is what I know. Next year we'll have 13 institutions as we add Sacred Heart, and you heard me use the term earlier, that are committed to being competitive. They are committed to investing in FCS football to be competitive and to be successful in the football field. And those are the programs that we want to be associated with in the CAA. And we're going to embrace those 13 programs next year, and know we're going to continue to have a very strong conference. It's going to have institutions that are going to compete for multiple playoff spots on an annual basis.
We talked about adding Sacred Heart this offseason. Obviously, the announcement came this offseason. Are you guys looking to expand above 13, maybe get back to 16? Are you looking at 14? And how aggressive will the conference be in potentially adding another member or another 2 or 3 members?
Yeah, good question, Zach. We've never based expansion based on a number. I think that's a dangerous situation when you start to do that. I'm going to go back to the statement I just said before, because I really think it lays the foundation for how we make decisions, especially as it relates to FCS football. We want to be associated with programs that are committed to being competitive. We are in a new era of college athletics, right? Right. Institutions and athletic departments are having to make difficult decisions on where they are prioritizing their athletic programs and the sports they have in their athletic programs. What I think is most important to me and to our athletic directors of the institutions that are part of the CAA Football Conference, again, is we want to be associated with those programs that are committed to being competitive in FCS football, committed to being successful. And that's how we're going to make decisions as we go forward. Certainly, geography plays a part in it, right? There's no question about that. We want to be associated with institutions that have high academic standards, that are committed to the overall success of their student athletes. And when you start to add in those factors, Zach, those are the things that we're looking at. We're not so much focused on, is it 13, is it 14, is it 15, is it 16? Those things that I previously mentioned, those are what are most important to us.
Zach and I are visiting with Joe D'Antonio, the CAA commissioner. Commissioner, because we talked about the programs that have left or are leaving, I mean, those are longtime members. Has the league kind of gotten reaffirmed its commitment from some of the other longtime programs, like, a UNH, Rhode Island, a Maine, some of those schools?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say reaffirmed or recommitted. I think those programs have been committed. I mean, you look at what the University of Rhode Island has done over the course of the 10 years that I've been the commissioner. In my first or second year, Craig, they lost to James Madison 73-0. And here we are 10 years later, and with the work of Jim Fleming, their coach, and Thor Bourne, their athletic director, they've done it the right way. Right, they have built a program that saw them win the conference last year and make a playoff appearance and win a playoff game. Okay, they've added they put in a new turf field. They've added lights to their stadium. They're getting ready at the end of this year to undergo, I think it's a $42 million renovation of their athletic facility and upgrade the stands on one side of their field. They are the poster child right now for us of committed to being competitive. You mentioned UNH, another stalwart in the conference. You look at the run that Coach Mack had. It's extended right into what Coach Santos is doing. Coach Santos, obviously, part of that run with Coach Mack, but I can't remember the exact number. Something like 16 straight playoff appearances. And I know that there's been a couple of years recently that they haven't made the playoffs, but they're constantly in that playoff discussion. And then you look at Maine, right? The defense they have, the black hole. They pride themselves on, I think, kind of playing with that chip on their shoulder and being a very competitive football team. And Coach, Jordan's done a great job up there. Jude Killey, since he stepped in as the athletic director, I think has brought a new energy into that program. So those three institutions that you just mentioned, I have no concerns about them and kind of the direction that they're going.
Commissioner, one of the big things that was announced, I guess even just a few years ago, is when you guys signed that deal with FloSports, and it was kind of the first FCS conference to take a step out of the ESPN Plus realm and putting their games on ESPN. How beneficial has that partnership been for the conference? And has it helped you kind of supplement because you talk about travel budgets and how big the conference is, has the extra money from that FloSports deal helped the schools in any way to fund other sports or travel budgets or give them a little bit of extra money at the end of this deal?
Well, it has. I mean, we're very fortunate. The FloSports deal for the CAA has been a very, very positive partnership. And just to take you behind the scenes a little bit, it's really a three-pronged situation. One of those prongs doesn't have an immediate effect on the CAA Football Conference, but I'll just quickly walk you through the scenario. So, obviously, as you know, FloSports is the CAA's streaming provider. The CAA also has a very close relationship with CBS Sports Network. And through that relationship, we are able to broadcast on the men's basketball side upwards of 24 games, regular season men's basketball games on national television. It's the most of any mid-major conference in the country in terms of having a national TV presence with its men's basketball program. They also broadcast our semifinals and championship in our men's basketball tournament, and they also do the championship game of our women's basketball tournament. And then the third prong that a lot of people don't necessarily realize is an important piece of what we do in the conference, and this is something that's very beneficial to our football members as well, is the FloSports deal does allow for a significant amount of flexibility as it relates to institutions being able to put games on local linear television. And I believe we have almost every team within the CAA Football Conference that's taking advantage of that parameter. So the fact that we've been able to cobble together that relationship, in my opinion, gives us one of, if not the best media rights packages in the country. And then, Zach, I'll touch on the last piece you mentioned. I can't get specific on the numbers, but for every home game that one of our institutions, every home football game that our institutions play in the CAA, we are returning a financial number to them through the FloSports agreement. So, in my opinion, it's been a really positive thing, not only for the football conference, but also for the full member conference. And we're really appreciative of the relationship that we have with FloSports. They've been a great partner.
Commissioner, you mentioned the changing landscape in college sports. What went into the decision for the CAA to add so many schools, especially in football, and how are you working with them to get them up to the level of some of the established programs in the league?
The answer to the question, Craig, I think needs to go back to when we started our expansion efforts 3 or 4 years ago. And at the time, we didn't know this was going to happen, but we had 10 schools in the full member CAA. And we at the time, in conjunction with our board, we being the conference office, in conjunction with our athletic directors and our presidents, tried to take a snapshot and a crystal ball and look into the future a little bit. And we started talking about putting together a program for the conference as a whole that was going to allow the conference to be both stable and competitive as we moved into the future, understanding that we were likely looking at a changing landscape as we went forward. And through those efforts, that's where the expansion discussions and initiative came from. So through that, we've ultimately added 5 full members. We've added Bryant and Sacred Heart as football only members. And your question about getting teams up to speed, I'm not concerned about that in the least bit. I think that there's no hidden agenda in terms of what it's going to take to be competitive in the CAA. And as we've brought these teams and these institutions in, we've had those conversations about where the conference is at from a financial standpoint, a competitiveness standpoint, what it's going to take to be competitive. And I think everybody who's in the conference now, and even Sacred Heart who's coming into the conference, there's 2 things. Number one, they understand what it means to be competitive, but they're also committed to being successful and being competitive. And, you take a school like Bryant University, when they came in as an affiliate member a couple of years ago, we knew that it was going to take them a little time to get up to speed. But you look at where that program's come in just a year. I think what a lot of people don't know is they have a 100-yard indoor facility on their campus. There's not many campuses either in the Northeast or in the South that have that luxury. They have done an incredible job with their facility, with the renovation that they've done, adding brand new locker rooms for the home and visiting teams, a brand new press box and stands for their fans. So that's the type of example that we mean when we say that we're and this goes back, Zach, to your question about numbers. We're not just looking to bring in teams to add another number. We're looking to bring in teams because we know that they can see the future and know what it takes to be successful, and they're ultimately going to be committed to being successful going forward.
Commissioner, I know you can't speak to specific teams, but you did add 2 members in Hampton and North Carolina A&T, both HBCU programs. There's been obviously some rumors out there that other HBCU programs have been interested in joining the conference at one point or another. Is that an avenue y'all have looked to explore because of the natural rivals with like Morgan State, Townsend, Howard, Hampton? Would that be a path that the CAA would be open to exploring in the future?
Yeah, Zach, it's again, any time we're talking about situations and questions involving membership, it ultimately boils down to one statement, that we're going to make decisions ultimately going forward that are going to be in the best interest of the CAA football conference as a whole. We were extremely fortunate in both the full member conference and the CAA football conference to bring on both Hampton and North Carolina A&T. 2 exceptional academic institutions that have an incredible tradition on their campuses, and they've brought some great traditions into the CAA that we as a conference never would have had an opportunity to experience without having them on board. They've been great additions for us. And again, going back to your earlier question of what do you look at when you're adding members, it really boils down to some of those factors that I've referenced, right? We're looking for solid academic institutions that are committed to the well-being of their student athletes, that fit in the geographic footprint of the conference, and that are committed to being competitive as we go forward. So if there is an HBCU institution that fits all those parameters, would we take a look? 100% we take a look. But again, we're going to continue to make decisions as it relates to what's best for the conference going forward.
Commissioner, just one more question. I mean, 10 years have probably flown by as the CAA commissioner. Just looking back, describe FCS football now as opposed to 10 years ago.
Well, first of all, Craig, I'll just say I'm incredibly humbled and thankful for the opportunity to be the commissioner of the CAA. I don't take anything for granted, and I've been extremely appreciative of the opportunity. I've tried to give it everything I've had over the last 10 years and work with some great men and women, both in our coaching staffs and our administration, our presidents. I'm really, really fortunate to have the position I have and work with the people I work with. The landscape of FCS football continues to ebb and flow, right? And I think that ebb and flow is a sign of the times as it relates to what's going on within the landscape of college athletics. We're now in a situation where our programs, if they wanted to, could literally give up to 105 scholarships, right? Now they're not doing that. And I don't see that happening anytime in the near future for most FCS programs, if not all of them. But that's something that didn't exist just a few years ago, right? We're seeing NIL. NIL is starting, in my opinion, to infiltrate itself into the landscape of FCS football, not at the level you're seeing in men's basketball, but it's certainly there. And that creep is only going to continue at a higher level, I think, as we go forward. So that's going to be a challenge. The other challenge I think we've seen is, and this is a credit to programs around the country, that folks are, I've talked about our league with a commitment to being competitive. There are more and more programs around the country in different leagues that have taken on that challenge to be committed to being competitive, and getting into the playoffs is more challenging than it's ever been before. And that's a credit to FCS football. That doesn't mean that the CAA is down because we're no longer getting 6 teams in the playoffs every year. It's to the contrary. It's a credit to, I think, what's going on around the country, and institutions have stepped up their game to being competitive, just like we feel as though we're really competitive. And are we going to compete for those playoff spots just like everybody else is? 100%. And that's I think what we're most proud of. But the landscape has certainly ebbed and flowed here as we've gone forward, with a lot of different factors involved in those changes.
Joe D'Antonio, Commissioner of the Coastal Athletic Association, we appreciate your time for joining Zach and I today. We hope the CAA has a wonderful season. Should be exciting, very deep race, of course. We're going to take a break from the FCS Edge, and when we come back for our third and final segment, Zach and I will have our pick'ems for week 2. This is the FCS Edge. Welcome back to the FCS Edge, our pick'em segment. This is a big week for Zach and I with FCS versus FCS games. There's so many that are so tight that I feel like I'm going to get them all wrong. I don't know about you, Zach, but let's get to our FCS game of the week. Number 2, South Dakota State at number 3, Montana State. Who's going to win this one?
I'm leaning the Jackrabbits here. And I know that might sound counterintuitive. You got the Gold Rush game. It's really hard to go win in Bozeman. But it also could be a little bit of bias that we haven't really got to see what this Montana State team truly is yet, because their only data point we have is against Oregon. But I really, really love the defense here for South Dakota State. I think they showed last week that they're just as athletic, they're just as dominant up front as they were maybe even a year ago. And I really was impressed with Chase Mason last week. I thought he was efficient. I thought he made good decisions. He made some plays with his legs, and I don't think his rushing stats really show that, Craig, because he got sacked 7 times with some exotic things. And funny enough, the offensive line was only credited with 2 of those sacks. So he has to get rid of the ball a little bit faster, especially when there's a blitz coming. But I love their run game, and Julius Loveridge, man, is one of the best running backs in the country. And I think it was such a no-brainer to think that he was going to be that All-American 1,000-yard rusher this year. There's no way he doesn't hit 1,000 yards this year if he stays healthy. But then on the flip side with Montana State, I'm very, very curious to see what I think the biggest thing for me is, what does the quarterback position look like? There's a little bit of a shift in scheme. Maybe not as downhill running and with power and things like that as we're accustomed to seeing with the new OC. Can Lampson make some plays to the air? We know what Taco Dowler could do on the outside. He had an outstanding game against Oregon. But for me, I'm going defensively, and I believe in Chase Mason a little bit more than Lampson, which makes me lean South Dakota State in this one, even on the road.
Yeah, Montana State, 35 of their last 36 home games they've won. It's hard to pick against them at home, but I'm going to do the same. I think Montana State was the clear number 2 behind North Dakota State going into the year. I think after week 1, South Dakota State is the clear number 2, pushing for number 1, because that performance was just so thorough against Sacramento State. So yeah, I'm going to go with the Jackrabbits as well on the road. Now, there's another top 25 matchup. Stephen F. Austin, number 25, is at Abilene Christian, number 16. Abilene, of course, is the UAC defending champion. Great matchups in recent years. This has become a terrific rivalry of close games. I think it's a big game for both teams because they're coming off FBS losses, didn't really get their high-powered offenses firing. I think it's a huge game for Zach Vidlac. I know you're a big fan for Stephen F. Austin. He hasn't he's put up great numbers, but sometimes they've been against the lower tier teams on their schedule. I think this is a big game for him, and of course on the road. I'm going to go with Abilene Christian at home.
Okay, I'm actually going to go on the opposite side. I'm going with Stephen F. Austin here. I think where the difference comes in is I just believe in their trenches a little bit more. They have a lot more continuity along the offensive and defensive lines. And like you said, I think Vidlac and this wide receiving core can exploit some matchups in the back end of Abilene's defense. But I will say, man, Stone Earl is a guy I'm really looking forward to seeing this weekend going up against a revamped secondary for Stephen F. Austin that's headlined by one of the top NFL prospects in Charles Demings at corner. Very, very curious to see how they match up there. But I think Stephen F. Austin wins the line of scrimmage battle, which always makes me think that they're going to win the game. And I'm a little bit biased toward that those trench play, and it might sound cliche, but that wins games, and that's why I'm going with Stephen F. Austin here.
Well, here's another one for you. Chattanooga is usually the ranked team, but not this year. Number 19 Tennessee Tech is at home taking on the Mocs. I kind of look at it as like a prove it to me kind of game. I mean, Tennessee Tech, blew out a Cumberland team that they should have. Chattanooga, a lot of new players, didn't quite do well against Memphis, and they generally do play well in FBS games. I'm going to go with Tennessee Tech at home. Bobby Wilder has done a great job, and they are right in the mix. Kikoa Vesperis, there's a new quarterback in from Eastern Washington. I think it's a fabulous matchup, in-state matchup. I'm going to go with Tennessee Tech.
Agreed. I like Tennessee Tech to win this one, and I actually think it could be pretty convincingly. The only hesitancy I have is Rusty Wright's one heck of a coach, Craig, and he always seems to find a way to get the best out of his teams, but they just had to replace so much this offseason. There's so many question marks. And Tennessee Tech, Bobby Wilder, what a rebuild job he's really done and how good they've become quickly. I love Kikoa at quarterback, and I think he has a really big game this week. I like Tennessee Tech to get this one done at home.
The big one out of the CAA, we talked to Commissioner D'Antonio earlier. Rhode Island, number 9 in the poll at Stony Brook. Stony Brook was ranked a week ago, not this week. It's a huge game because there's a lot of competitive teams in this league. Stony Brook being one at home. Rhode Island was picked first in the preseason poll. They don't play Villanova, the number 3 team. Monmouth was number 2 team in the poll. They don't play them. They don't play Towson, I believe. So the schedules, being so big, you don't play everybody. If they can get this one at Stony Brook, it's going to go a long way, down the line. I'm going to go with Rhode Island on the road.
Yeah, I'm also going to go with Rhode Island on the road, and that's no shot at Stony Brook. I still think they could be a factor down the stretch for the postseason. I was really high on Rhode Island. I have them in my top 10. And I think last week you kind of saw the duality of this team where they struggled a little bit early, but once it kind of clicked into place, you saw how potent this offense can be. I'm a really big fan of their offense. Marquise Buchanan is an absolute monster at wide receiver. I think they find a way to get it done on the road.
Yeah, Marquise really had a big game to get the year going. All right, another CAA team, New Hampshire hosting Holy Cross. Whew, that's a great New England matchup. Holy Cross really played well against Northern Illinois, almost pulled the upset. I think New Hampshire, that's a team that won't wow you, but they did wow you last week when they won at North Carolina Central, which we both like to win that game, but Matt Veza got off to a great start. I'm going to go New Hampshire at home, but I think this is a toss-up.
Yeah, I guess I didn't learn my lesson last week. They're really going to have to give it to me this week. I'm gonna actually go Holy Cross here, getting the upset on the road. I was really impressed with Cal Swanson last week. I liked his versatility, and I think that was something they were missing after they lost to Luca. And this Holy Cross scheme with Jaden Clervaux at running back, that they finally got some real talent at wide receiver, and that they kind of were missing after Jalen Coker went to the NFL as well. So it seems like they've replenished in these key positions, and I thought defensively they played really, really well last week. Their passing defense only allowed 109 passing yards to Northern Illinois. So I think Holy Cross gets it done, man. I think it's another statement win for the Patriot League, and which to me, Craig, probably one of the most interesting races in the country when you look at Lehigh, Richmond, Holy Cross. They could be real competitive coming down the stretch.
Richmond in the Patriot League, they lost to Lehigh in that banner game last week. They're at Wofford. Wofford beat them last year. Richmond actually was 0-2 to start the year, and here they are trying to avoid that at Wofford, a team that did beat them. I think Richmond gets it done on the road. Wofford almost beat South Carolina State last week, lost by a point in the fourth quarter. I think the Spiders really need a big game, but both teams scored on a kickoff return last week, so their numbers were even skewed point totals. They really need to get it going offensively.
Yeah, I was a little bit more impressed with Richmond last week, which is why I'm going to go them. I think their ceiling's a little bit higher. I just don't know what Wofford's identity is, man. They only averaged 2.6 yards per play last week, got held to 135 total yards. Their passing attack for me was what's a little bit worrisome. I have a little bit more belief in Wickersham with the Spiders, and I think they just ran into a Lehigh team, Craig, that I think is actually really good and probably even still a bit underrated. I think they can make a push into the top 10 this year if they really reach their ceiling. So I like Richmond to bounce back with a big win over Wofford this weekend.
It's the FCS Edge right there. Speaking of identity, Morgan State defense is their identity. They're in the battle for Greater Baltimore, hosting Towson, which has been a really strong non-conference rivalry. Who do you like in this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go upset here, Craig. I'm going to go Morgan State getting the win over Towson. It's been a while since the Bears have won the Battle of Greater Baltimore, but I really am a big fan of Eric Hunter. I think they may have solved their quarterback issues. They played really well last week against South Alabama, had some unfortunate turnovers that put them in bad situations. They have the MEAC Offensive Player of the Year, a running back, and I thought their defensive line played much better than I thought after the loss of Elijah Williams, who just made the active roster for the Minnesota Vikings as a UDFA. Towson played well, right? They started it funny enough, and this is so much like Pete Shinnick, right? Craig, they listed 3 quarterbacks on the depth chart last week against Norfolk State. Didn't play any of them. They started true freshman Andrew Endorf. What a decision there. He played well, threw 3 touchdowns. They beat Norfolk pretty convincingly, won the line of scrimmage battle there. But I think Morgan State's defense is the key here, and the offense with Kobe at quarterback makes just a handful of key plays to get the upset over Towson.
Preseason, you and I were trying to beat the Opta supercomputer. We'll see if we do. But the supercomputer actually picked Towson to have the most wins, including non-conference, out of any CAA team this year. So that was a little bit of a surprise to see it. I'm going to go Towson on the road here. It's been a terrific series. Last game on our pick'ems, Alabama State at Southern. It's out of the SWAC. It doesn't count in the SWAC standings, though. Southern has 2 games here, including Mississippi Valley State they beat last week, that don't count towards the standings. I saw enough to Andrew Bodie last week, our staff performed HBCU Player of the Week. He was fabulous in an FBS loss. I'm going to go Alabama State.
Yeah, Andrew Body Show. Man, listen, I'm close to his family. I talked to his dad actually yesterday, and man, he is special when he's healthy, Craig. I think he's probably the best quarterback in HBCU football when he's healthy, and you saw how dynamic he could really be. Southern obviously losing starting quarterback Jalen Woods to an unfortunate injury this past weekend at Mississippi Valley State. Cameron McCoy a little bit banged up, Craig. We don't really know what's going on there at quarterback. I like Alabama State big in this one. I heard last week, they gave up 52, I believe, to UAB. Craig, they were missing 5 to 6 starters on the defensive side of the football. They all should be back this weekend. I like Alabama State to get this one on the road.
Well, a certain person would be telling us, not so fast, my friend. All these FCS versus FCS matchups, we still have a lot of FBS games going. I think there's 31 overall this week. Who's your pick to pull the upset?
Man, there's so many good ones. And I was actually looking at the schedule before you asked this because I think the first one I'll kind of look at was UT Martin at UTEP. UT Martin's got us one last year, right? When they knocked off Kennesaw State. UTEP has not been a very good team. I know Scotty Wald is trying to kind of rebuild that program, but they got knocked off last year by Southern Utah. And I think for me, UTEP seems very gettable, and I like UT Martin's chances in that one.
I agree. And we've talked Sac State. I think they can get it done against Nevada. But I think the FBS storyline of the year is this week. Does the SWAC end a 40-year drought? Florida A&M at FAU. Jackson State at Southern Miss. Now, neither of those SWAC teams were overly impressive a week ago. Jackson State pulled out the win, and Florida A&M lost to Howard 10-9. I do think they can rebound and get the win here. But it's been a long time since Eddie Robinson led Grambling past Oregon State for a SWAC FBS win. This just may be the week. All right, so that wraps up our week 2 episode of the FCS Edge. I know the games are going to be huge. I know next week we will have a lot to say about South Dakota State against Montana State. We'll find out who's hitting the panic button, maybe with an 0-2 start. We'll see. What stands out to you this week?
Yeah, I'm very, very curious to see the reaction if South Dakota State wins this game. Montana State will be sitting at 0-2. I'm very, very interested there. But also, too, you mentioned all the big CAA games, right? There's some big out-of-conference games, some big in-conference games. This is a conference where one game could separate you from being in a large school or being just out of the playoffs. Man, I'm really, really interested to see how some of these matchups, we previewed some of them, is going to have such a big impact, not just on the CAA race, but the FCS playoff race as well.
Great week to have Commissioner Joe D'Antonio on. So we'd like to thank you for tuning in. We'd like to thank Graham Bell, our producer. Zach and I will be back next week, and we hope you enjoyed the FCS Edge.